Welcome to the launch of the Global Cooperation Barometer 2026, a tool and accompanying insight report from the World Economic Forum prepared in partnership with McKinsey and Company. My name is Sheba Crocker, Managing Director at the World Economic Forum. The release of the barometer comes ahead of the forum's annual meeting in less than 2 weeks, and it is meant to help shape conversations that will take place in Davos, and more crucially, to help stakeholders gain insight into the nature of cooperation at a time of immense uncertainty. Now in its third year, the Global Cooperation Barometer measures the state of global cooperation broadly and across 5 key pillars: trade and capital flows, innovation and technology, climate and nature, health and wellness, and peace and security. This year's findings are sobering, but in some respects also reassuring. Multilateralism continues to face strong headwinds, but global cooperation is proving resilient in some areas. And to hear more about the report, I am joined in Geneva today by Børge Brende, President and CEO of the World Economic Forum. Bob Sternfels, Global Managing Partner of McKinsey, is joining online. For this media briefing, following us live online, we have 59 journalists from 51 different media outlets and agencies covering 23 countries worldwide. Børge, if I may turn to you, you open the report by writing that uncertainty and unpredictability are being fueled by historic changes across several fronts. What are we seeing in terms of global cooperation?
So we are seeing fundamental changes in the way we cooperate, but it's not the end of cooperation. We are really seeing the contours of the 21st century's cooperation. As I said, it's not an end to cooperation, it's really an evolution. And what is interesting with the geopolitical barometer is that showing that global cooperation, as you also underlined, Sheba, is very resilient in the face of the geopolitical headwinds. We are seeing that the way we cooperate looks different in the new reality. It is more bespoke, it is more interest-based, and we are seeing more friend-shoring. Cooperation is still taking place, albeit in different forms. So we have plurilaterals in the trade area. That means coalition of willing countries or partners. So if you are not okay with how we are seeing multilateral agreements, for example, in the field of digital trade, you have 50, 60, 70 countries coming together and they agree on a plurilateral trade agreement, and that can later become a multilateral one, especially if it happens under the auspices of WTO. And then we have the mega trade deals. We're seeing that Mercosur, Latin America, big trading bloc, cooperate with the EU, so you have this kind of mega deals between regions. And then we see also an enhanced regional cooperation. We're seeing, for example, now in the EU, they're strengthening their single market and looking at how they can cooperate more strongly when they're faced with new tariffs. I think the biggest tariff that we are facing globally now is really uncertainty. And with uncertainty, we also see more clearly that there are areas that we still need to collaborate. And cooperation is important. That's why we also have coined for Davos meeting in a couple of weeks, the spirit of dialogue. And dialogue is not a luxury, it is a necessity. And we know that in many areas, we really need to enhance cooperation. Look at future pandemics. There is no way that can be dealt with in a single country. Look at, for example, cyber crime. $4 to $5 trillion are lost every year in cyber crime. I think we also need to just realize that the only way to fight that is that we come together, including China, US, Europe, and other countries, come together to fight this. Look at plastics in the ocean. If we continue like we're doing now, there can be more plastics in the ocean than there are fish in 2050. I think we all agree that this has to be dealt with at a global level with global agreement. So these are some examples that cooperation is still happening, but it's different than in the past, and that's the new reality, and we're coping with. But in many ways, cooperation is like water. If it sees it's being blocked, it just finds other ways, because cooperation is a necessity and not a luxury.
Thank you, Børge. What you're describing, of course, is, as the report itself puts it, an evolution of cooperation. The idea that cooperation in the face of strong geopolitical headwinds is not retreating, but it is evolving. Bob, I'll turn to you. Can you walk us through some of what the data are telling us, both broadly and in some of the key areas the report covers?
Sure, Shiba, and it's great to join you. And I would start by saying I think it's more important than ever to invest in a longitudinal, fact-based view of cooperation. And it's been our privilege to partner with the World Economic Forum. This is the third year for the Cooperation Barometer, and we'd like to have this continue because it allows us to look at trends over a longitudinal period of time in a very granular way. And as Børge said, what the data bears out is that cooperation is in a state of evolution, not end. It's evolving, not ending. And I'll give you a few of the facts behind this, and I'll frame it: where is it dropping? Where is it staying steady? And where is it actually increasing? Because I think that gives you more of a nuance to understand cooperation. And so where it's dropping largely ties with many of the headlines today. We see multilateral cooperation dropping at an all-time record level, over 20% drop in 2024. It'll drop further, I suspect, in 2025. The peace and security measures are also at an all-time low. If I took one disappointing data point, there were 123 million individuals that were forcibly displaced in 2024. That's a record number. So we see drops in particular around multilateralism and peace and security. If I focus on steady, health has been a steady point, and it's an interesting tale of two cities. We've had a lot of headlines about the drop in cross-border government assistance in health, and that has dropped by over 1/3. But interestingly, it's been more than made up for in cross-border health investments by private institutions, including US-China, which are at a record high. And so we see cross-border innovations in health from a private sector compensating public sector drop, which means health has actually stayed steady. As Børge says, there's more to do on health, but it is worth noting the two different dynamics that are happening in health. And then finally, on the up side of things, if I talked about the down, the steady, now on the up, we actually see trade increasing. It increased to global trade increased 2.4% in 2024, but it's more diversified. It's more geopolitically aligned. The geopolitical distance in trade has actually shrunk. We've done some work on MGI on that. So trade hasn't retreated, but it's changed. Fueled by, not by multilateral agreements, which have dropped precipitously, but by an increase in bilateral agreements, as Børge talked about. They're up 24%. Technology, which is an interesting one as well, is also up. Data flows are at an all-time high. And cross-border investment in technology, largely underpinned by this AI revolution, are causing massive capital flows to enable cross-border technology cooperation. And finally, climate, which is something that we talk about, but when you get at the granular level, there are some bright spots in this. There was more solar investment last year than the last 3 years combined, and carbon capture investments were also at an all-time high. So there are some advancements also on the climate front that the barometer points to.
Thank you so much, and thank you to both of you for those insights. Let's turn now to some recommendations, and here I want to highlight a line from the report that says, "The paradox is that at a time of such rapid change, developing new and innovative approaches to cooperation requires refocusing on some of the basics, notably doubling down on dialogue." Now, Børge, of course, this very much aligns with the theme of this year's annual meeting, which you touched on earlier. Can you talk more about this?
Of course, with pleasure. And what we know is that a prerequisite for cooperation is that it starts with a dialogue. And a dialogue with the right spirit, coming together in the room, maybe not agreeing at the beginning of the dialogue, but finding out that there is overlap in the interest. And I think this is a little bit different from in the past. It's easier now to move when countries or companies have common interests. So we will have to identify these areas. And also the global economy is changing very fast, as Bob was underlining, and as also statistics from McKinsey is showing, is that if you look at the 10 largest companies in the world when it comes to market cap, today 8 out of 10 are tech companies. Just a decade ago, it was like 2. So this shows that the new technologies are already changing the world very rapidly. And that's coming back to trade. Trade used to be the engine of growth for decades. So trade grew 2 or 3 times faster than the global trend growth. Unfortunately, we are now below the global economic trend growth that we had for decades. We do expect 3.2% growth this year. It's not bad, but we are seeing also that trade is growing maybe a little bit less than the global trade, but is much more diversified, as also Bob underlined. We're seeing, for example, trade in digital trade is growing exponentially. We also see that trade in services are growing, but the traditional manufactured goods is growing more slowly. So what we're then seeing is that we still do have quite substantial growth. And we also in, for example, the largest economy in the world, the US, 25-26% of global economy, grew quite considerably in the third quarter. And why is that? I think we're now seeing a new growth engine, not any more trade in the same way, but the new technologies, huge investments in the new technologies. And if we're able to make sure that these new technologies also work in the interest of humankind and that they can also move the world forward, we might be able to see decades of growth moving forward driven by these new technologies. So we avoid slow growth like in the 1970s, and we maybe can see higher trend growth in the years to come in developed economies than we have seen in the past. And that would be very good, because we need new jobs and we need new opportunities.
Thank you so much. And of course, you raised a lot of issues relevant to the private sector. And Bob, looking at the private sector, one point you make in the report is that companies will need new organizational capabilities to move cooperation forward. What would this look like?
It's a great question, Shiva. And I would start by underscoring something that Børge said, which is cooperation can't happen without dialogue. And so this spirit of dialogue for this year's World Economic Forum, I think, is more important than ever. It's almost a precursor. And if you zone into your question about what does this mean for private enterprise, and as you know, we spend most of our time working with the leaders of private enterprise, I think there's a real question about organization models in today's world. And to be honest, and maybe this is a little bit of indictment of ourselves and our profession, the thinking hasn't evolved that much in the last 60 years. One of the most seminal articles on global organization design is an article, if you can believe it, from 1959 by a predecessor of mine named Gil Klee called Creating a World Enterprise, which was put in Harvard Business Review. And it laid out effectively the modern global organization. And that thinking hasn't changed very much until this date, but it's changing now. And so to your question, what's it changing to when the parameters of cooperation and lack of cooperation are changing underneath private enterprise CEOs' feet? And I'd argue that there's at least three things that are on the minds of global CEOs right now as they think about how to organize for today's world. And the first is, yes, there's a lot of things that are defensive measures, but how do you look for opportunities? How do you play offense as well as defense in a world of all this change? And one of the things that we've looked at is, as you know, Borge talks about cooperation is a bit like water, it finds a way. Well, if you believe that, do you know where the currents are going? And we have done some work to look at global trade corridors going forward, and about 30% of the world's corridors will change over the next 10 years in a much more diversified way. How do you take advantage of that and potentially hyperconnect the world? So, can you play offense as well as defense? The second is, can you build an organization that has resilience in its core? No matter what, there will be future shocks. And what I hear from CEOs now is, how resilient is my organization? And we've also cooperated with the World Economic Forum on the topic of resilience. And sadly, what we find is only 29% of large companies today believe that they can withstand a future unprecedented shock. That's not high enough. So leaders who are building resilience into their organizations, we think actually stand a better chance in a more volatile, unpredictable world. The final one is how to think about not abandoning global, but being local and global at the same time, getting the benefits of operating cross-border, but also thinking about much more localized approach to talent, to capital, and to technology in the companies that you operate. And so, Shio, I think there's a rethink right now of what global enterprise means in a world where cooperation is changing under our feet.
Thank you so much. I think, Børge, both of you have raised trade, and that's maybe picking up on Bob's point, a good example of a place where we're seeing global, regional, and local. And focusing there, again, just to say the latest barometer reading indicates cooperation in trade and capital stayed broadly flat, but of course, that beneath the surface, real changes are evident. Anything more you want to say on the question of trade coming out of the report?
So trade is picking up again. We thought that the effect of the tariffs would be probably more consequential, but we are also seeing that the tariffs are not as high as they were predicted at the start. But at the same time, as I said, nations and companies find different ways of then trading. And at the same time, as we see that trade is not growing as fast as it used to be, we're seeing other parts of the economy growing much faster. Like in the US last year, there were investments in the frontier technologies, and especially in AI, of $500 billion US. And if we are seeing productivity gains at that scale also moving forward in other countries, that can also lead to additional economic growth. Of course, there are also challenges related to the new technologies. So we are seeing that in the new reality where cooperation is different, less multilateralism, less multilateral agreements, we are seeing that there are other ways that trying to make up to what we're seeing then lacking on the multilateral level.
Thank you so much, Børge, and thank you to both of you for those insights. We will now turn to some questions from the media who are currently following us online. And just to confirm that we have 50 journalists from 48 different media outlets representing 23 countries joining us online. I will turn first to Ishan Tharoor from the Washington Post in the United States to ask your question.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I appreciate this call, and I look forward to seeing you all in Davos. My question, I appreciate the metaphor of water, cooperation as water. We spent in our line of work, we spent a lot of time looking at the dams, not the water. But I'd love to hear from Borje or Bob, a bit more elaboration on, in this moment when we are reckoning with the unraveling of multilateralism, when we're reckoning with obviously an administration here in Washington that is upending norms in all sorts of ways. How does a forum like the World Economic Forum hold on to a kind of idealism for the 21st century? The institutions that have underpinned cooperation, multilateralism, the UN, the rules-based order, all of that seems to be in profound crisis. What is the way of looking at this evolution but maintaining an idealism about international solidarity and collective action and cooperation?
Thank you so much, Ishan. And that maybe is a question that is appropriate for both of you. But Børge, do you want to start off?
Well, thank you, and thank you for that very important question. I think the main finding in the global barometer, and maybe we all were a bit surprised about it, is that global cooperation is still strong, but it's different from the past. So when it's not then based on, for example, new trade agreements negotiated through the World Trade Organization, there are other ways to then collaborate. So there are mega regional deals, there are bilateral trade deals, and you have plurilaterals, coalitions of willings. And I think this is not only happening on the trade side, but this is happening also on the environment, on climate, on the new technologies. It's just a different way of collaborating. But as I said at the outset, we're also seeing more friendshoring. So we're seeing that countries that are more aligned trade more with each other. And this is, of course, what we're seeing the contours of in the 21st century is a new paradigm where we're seeing what we thought was going to be more multipolarity. I think that will come, but it's more now multipolarish because we're seeing also interest spheres being established, and that I think underpins also your point. As long as this doesn't end cooperation and there are new ways of cooperating, I think that still we can see prosperity and growth. But if we cannot avoid big wars or more conflicts, of course, that is the biggest threat to all development. But we should not forget, though, that even the World Trade Organization, where we see we're faced with big impulses now, 75% of the global trade is still happening under the rules of the World Trade Organization. It's just that not new deals are being made under the auspices of the WTO, but there are different ways of cooperating. And the World Economic Forum, we just have to look at this from a real political viewpoint, and that's why we're saying spirit of dialogue. People still need to come together, and then based on those dialogues, we might see then cooperation coming out of this if the different players feel that they have enough common interest to agree.
Thank you so much, Børge. Bob, is there anything that you want to add in response to that question?
Maybe just briefly, because I loved what Borge said, but Ishan, I deeply appreciate the question, and I do think, to go back to the water analogy, that there have been a lot of talks of dams. If you kind of keep that analog, would be, but how do we foster the dialogue and creation to create aqueducts? And I think there is enormous potential for aqueducts, and I think it's the place where the World Economic Forum can be a catalyst for this. And if you think about opportunities that may not have naturally been on the radar, how do we bring counterparties together to look at this? Example, Japan and India. And you think about some of the leading technologies in Japan, but also some of the labor shortages that they face, making cross-border investments where technology moves to India and India finds a way to scale. It's going to be one of the key unlocks for a future manufacturing base in India coming from Japan. And yet the understanding of those CEOs with each other is still fairly nascent. Could the World Economic Forum be a platform to create an aqueduct there? Aqueducts in places we think don't exist. I'll give one more example. I talked about private sector cross-border investment in healthcare. I don't think a lot of attention is being given to the collaboration that's happening even under today's construct between the US and China. And you look at US healthcare investment in China for technology that then is actually enabling and helping around the rest of the world. Can we spend a bit more time on that and highlight some examples of aqueducts that are working? So I just might throw that word out there as we think about water, we think about dams. Can we think about the World Economic Forum being a place to create aqueducts?
Well, keeping with the theme of water here in rainy Switzerland today, Yasmin Osman from Handelsblatt in Switzerland, I will turn to you for the next question.
Thanks a lot for taking my question. My question is more European focused, and I would like to know how you think Europe is positioned in this new fragmented world, and what will be the main trends and key challenges in 2026 in your view?
Thank you for that question. Børge, maybe I'll turn to you.
Thank you. When we look at the European Union and Europe, you can look at it as glass half full or half empty. If you start with a half full, let's not forget that the fastest growing economy in the whole OECD, including US, Canada, Japan, Australia, is Spain. And Spain is a large economy. Look at Greece, for example, is now borrowing at a lower interest rate than many other European countries. And they have kind of rebounded and are also seeing quite a lot of economic growth. While you see some of the larger European economies are challenged because of higher energy prices and also fierce competition in some of their areas, but they also need to then pivot and find new areas, maybe produce even higher up in the value chain, also implement the new technologies. But Europe is still the single market, is still the largest market in the world. But Europe has to balance in this more competitive world. And I guess Europe doesn't want to end up in an interest sphere, but wants to be Europe working both transatlantic, but working also with Asia, and is also very close to Africa. So it's a very important year for Europe, and we know we also have the ongoing war in Ukraine that is also causing challenges, and we know there are many impulses in local or national politics in Europe. But I feel that there is a momentum in Brussels now for increased cooperation inside the EU, strengthening also the single market. And if you implement new measures in the single market, you can have the same impact as you lower tariffs with 10, 20, 30% from the outside. So there are barriers there that also came out of the Draghi report, and they are ready to be addressed if there is a political will to do something with it.
Thank you, Børge. For our next question, I will turn the floor to Tianyu Sun from the Guangming Daily in China for your question, please.
Thank you so much for taking my question. And my question is, will multilateralism have an impact on the globalization landscape and on multilateralism? Will globalization undergo permanent changes? For example, the WTO DG Ngozi has proposed the idea of re-globalization. I want to hear your opinion from the World Economic Forum and from Bob. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And Bob, maybe I will turn to you for this question. You did talk a bit about multilateralism and, of course, the changing nature of cooperation as just noted in the question.
I think it's a great question. And look, I think in the honest truth room, the jury is still out. But I think the hopeful case around this is that, and the data does bear this out, that trade in all of its guises, goods, services, data, does not shrink. It continues to grow. And we've shown the data that as trade grows, global economic growth grows. But it will grow in more diversified and more resilient ways. One of the unintended consequences of the last 25 years is trade got fairly concentrated around really large trunk routes. If we played forward, could we think about a world where the world is hyper-connected with a much larger number of trade routes and connection points? And if we did that, could economic growth not only happen, but potentially be more inclusive? And that's my optimistic case in this as we look about a world where trade like water continues, but it perhaps does it in a more diversified way.
Thanks very much. Well, we have reached the end of questions from the media, and that brings us also to the end of this media briefing. Thank you to all of the media who have joined us, and thank you again to our panelists, Børge Brende and Bob Sternfels.